bringing together Israelis, Palestinians, and others to engage in this conversation on literature, activism, and the future of the Middle East. And I would also like to thank Shelley Pomerance, the indefatigable Shelley Pomerance. For organizing all of this. She probably hates me and she will never invite me again to organize anything because of my inability to respond to emails in a timely fashion. But I thought it was just me. No, it's all of us.
I also thought it was just me.
So I'm the moderator of the panel. My name is Kareem Shaheen. I'm an editor at New Lines Magazine, which is a long-form magazine dedicated to journalism from the Middle East and all over the world. And I was a former Guardian Middle East correspondent. And I'm the moderator for the panel today. Our panelists today, I'm going to start with Rami, who's right next to me. Rami Younis is a Palestinian filmmaker, writer, and journalist. He was the co-founder and first ever host of the Arabic-speaking news show On the Other Hand, which exposed fake news and countered misinformation on Israel-Palestine media. Rami was also a Harvard Divinity School Fellow and worked as a journalist for the online magazine 972 and as an editor of its Hebrew sister site, Local Call. At the moment, Rami is touring the US with his newly released award-winning sci-fi documentary, Lid, a feature film he co-directed and co-produced that tells the story of his hometown since it was occupied in 1948 through two realities, with or without the occupation. I hope he remembers us when he's famous and continues to partake, and when he's even more famous.
Your last name is Shaheen? You're living here, Montreal?
Maya Savir is an Israeli writer and human rights and reconciliation activist. She has published 6 fiction books and a narrative nonfiction called On Reconciliation, which dives into the conflicts and reconciliation processes of South Africa and Rwanda to extract lessons that are relevant to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Maya has been working in civil society in Israel, as well as in various countries in Africa, and is currently working with Israeli and Palestinian partners to bring a just and lasting peace to all. May their efforts succeed. Ehab Lotayef, a Canadian poet, writer, community activist, and IT manager of Egyptian origin. As a poet and writer, Ehab published a bilingual poetry collection, To Love a Palestinian Woman, of which I'm a huge fan, in 2010, while the CBC produced his play Crossing Gibraltar in 2006. He is currently serving on the board of the Quebec Writers' Federation. Last but not least, Carlos Fraenkel is a scholar and writer who grew up in Germany and Brazil. He studied in Berlin and Jerusalem with detours through Sao Paulo and Paris, and is now James McGill Professor of Philosophy and Jewish Studies at McGill University in Montreal. He was also Professor of Comparative Religion and Philosophy at Oxford, and among his books is the award-winning Teaching Plato in Palestine, Philosophy in a Divided World. And we're going to talk about the book that you're going to be publishing soon, which is Radical Ancients, Philosophy as Experiments in Living, in which he turns to ancient philosophers for advice on how we should live. So thank you all for coming again this year at such momentous times. I wanted to start the conversation by actually asking you all why you're here. I confess that when Shelley reached out and with the idea of doing the same panel that we did last year, I was honestly quite skeptical as to the point of gathering again. It didn't feel like there was anything to talk about. It didn't feel like it was really the moment to talk about anything, that there was still so much going on. So I want to ask you all why you're here to talk about this, and why that's important. Let's start with you, Rami.
Money. Is this on?
Are we all getting paid? Or is it...
So, Kareem, last year was a lot of fun, to be honest. I don't know. How many people were here last year? Oh my God.
Wow.
Oh, wow. That was surprising. I was expecting maybe a couple of...
They didn't learn the lesson.
So, no, I think I know why I'm here. I don't know. You guys will talk for yourselves, and I don't know why you're here, but I know why I'm here. At the moment, I am touring the US with my film. We just released a film. But it was important for me to still be here. I am actually missing a screening right now in New York. We're doing, on a daily basis, we're doing a screening with Q&As. But I am missing that. It was important for me to come here and to continue the discussion from last year. And as a Palestinian citizen of Israel, it's important for me to represent my community who, most of my community, I've been feeling they have been silenced since October 7th and unable to speak against what is happening to our people. And I feel like I do need to represent, I do need to keep talking about what's happening to the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip, and hopefully engage in some interesting conversation with my great colleagues whom I remember fondly from last year. Yeah.
Thank you. I too enjoyed our conversation last year, and I think it was unique because it was genuinely a conversation. We exchanged thoughts. It was not merely us throwing at one another preconceived notions. We actually exchanged ideas, and I hope we'll be able to do it today. And I hope we'll be able to do it today because I think we are in dire need of being able to speak in complexities. This horrible war has taken, and is still taking lives, innocent lives. People are losing their homes, the integrities of their souls and their bodies. But we have also lost the ability to speak in complexities. And I personally feel that I need to reject these categories of being pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. I am pro-people, pro-human beings. The lives of all children are dear to me. And although it is understandable, it's unfortunate, but it's understandable that many Israelis and many Palestinians have lost perspective. I think it's unfortunate that many friends of Israel and friends of Palestine in the world think that they are supporting Israel and Palestine by taking part in this discourse that is very divided and not complex, not very intelligent, to be honest. I think both Israelis and Palestinians, we need your help to keep this perspective, to keep our eyes on the ball, and the ball is equality and justice for all. And I hope we'll be able to speak in those terms today.
First, I did enjoy last year very much, and I agree with Maya 100%. Last year was a very nice, open discussion between us, and that's always welcome and rare many times, and that's why I didn't hesitate for a second. Needed panel.
So I also enjoyed our conversation last year very much, and yet I find it surreal to be sitting here again, and I must say I hope we will not be sitting here again next year, at least not for the same reasons. It reminds me a bit of this film, The Pianist, by Roman Polanski, that I'm sure many of you have seen, where the initial scene and the last scene are almost identical. The pianist is playing in front of a great audience, and in between there is a total nightmare, right? That's how I feel a little bit, reconvening here. I would definitely say that I have lost more of my confidence in the power of rational persuasion, so I don't know how much talking can really affect. But I would not say that I've become speechless, and I have been trying to consistently convey a message as a scholar, actually mostly as a scholar. I haven't been able to actually write about any of this. I've tried a few times and nothing really came out. And I would say that my core message is very much aligned with what Maya said, namely really insisting on the moral complexity of this conflict. I think, an academic space like McGill University is a place where one can appreciate and learn about complexity. And from the beginning of this war, I felt somehow very, very unhappy about the Manichaean rhetoric that you find on both sides that divides, the parties up into perpetrators and and victims, Zionists who describe Israel as the last bastion of Western civilization fighting back the Arab barbarians, but also anti-Zionist pro-Palestinians who describe, Zionist Jews as the new Nazis. So this kind of rhetoric I found very, very, very unappealing, and to maybe sort of nail down what I feel is a much, much better formula, I like to quote Edward Said, who in an essay described the Palestinians as refugees of refugees and as victims of victims. And I think it's a very, very simple formula that really, I think, captures the complexity that, acknowledges somehow the humanity and the vulnerability of the other side, and that I find is much more powerful than the sort of perpetrator-victim rhetoric that one finds on both sides, at least among the more extreme. And I'm super, super happy to be here with people who I think, share this appreciation for, that things are not so simple.
Thank you. Well, let's create this space for rational conversation, for grappling with complexities, and I could not think of a panel of more distinguished writers and speakers that I could engage with on these questions. I wanted to start where you left off, Carlos, and the question of victims and refugees of refugees. And actually, I'm going to direct the question to Maya. So this journalist, Arwa Damon, who was, for years, she was a senior CNN correspondent. She wrote a piece immediately after October 7th, in which she said, if we look at the Israel-Gaza war today, this sheer madness that is unfolding as we all watch, if we look at the history of the Palestinian population and the history of Zionism, the horrific events of the Holocaust, what Palestinians have endured for more than 75 years, we're talking about the re-traumatization over and over again of the two populations at the center of all of this, which already carry generations of deep, intense trauma. Israelis and Palestinians are born with the traumas of the generations that came before. Both have been born already in hyped-up survival mode. Whose came first, who caused whose fault it is, none of that changes the reality that both come from generational lines of intense and severe trauma, both passed down and lived. And the argument that she was making is that we keep going in circles. We keep going back and forth in circles. And I'm wondering, as a parent yourself, and as someone who's lived through so many of these, upswellings of war and conflict, can you talk a bit about the impact that it has on younger people, who are kind of coming up in this environment, both the Israelis that are growing up and they're constantly hearing the sirens, and the Palestinian children who are, being raised to, all they know is their entire family is gone?
I've given a lot of thought over the past months, also as a writer, how and if it is even possible to convey just how difficult, how insane life has been at home for all of us. Maybe I'll start with just trying to explain just how personal everything is. How many people we all know who have been personally affected by this. I live in Tel Aviv. I'm not from the south of Israel. And I know so many people who have been affected. I have a friend who was a peace activist who was murdered. She was burned. I have a very good close friend who both of his parents were burned. I have a colleague who was kidnapped together with her daughter and grandchildren after witnessing her husband being murdered in front of her eyes. I have a neighbor whose son was critically injured. And I have friends in Gaza. Two of them, although they have been able to flee, all their families are in Gaza. I have a friend who I met a few years ago at a Meditation for Peace conference, if you can imagine. And we managed to stay in contact for all of these years. Every time Hamas sent missiles to Tel Aviv, he wrote me, "Take care." And every time Israel bombed Gaza, I wrote him, "Take care." I don't think he made it. He's an elderly gentleman. And I have another friend in Gaza who was a colleague. We tried to do work together. In my previous position, I worked on malnutrition, fighting malnutrition. And we tried together to start a project in Gaza. We were not successful because Israel, Egypt, and Hamas didn't want us to succeed. He's okay, he managed to flee, but he has nothing left. So this is all very, very personal, very graphic. Palestinian friends, Israeli Palestinians. Rami, I'm sure you will be able to speak of this much more than I. I can just say that from my point of view, Israeli Palestinians have a very difficult time speaking. The first weeks, the first months, I think everybody was shocked, literally in shock.
Take your time.
Thank you. I can say something optimistic, though. I'm compelled to. Since my last book came out on reconciliation, I've been giving talks all over to different audiences, various ages, Israelis, Palestinians. And the chief questions I was dealing with was whether the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is unique, because I think many Israelis and many Palestinians think that our conflict is the most difficult. It's complex, it's bloody, it's painful, more than any other conflicts. And what I try to do is to convey, to tell the stories of other conflicts that are just as bad. And I felt that the notions towards, and the feelings towards the notions I was conveying was generally very positive. And I think there are two main reasons for this. The first is that I spoke of Africa, and I think Africa is very interesting to many people, so, it seems very mysterious and exotic. The second reason, and now I'm focusing on Israeli Jews, is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict seemed distant, controllable. So, the things I was saying was, okay, sometime when we're done with all our more pressing problems and we get to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, then okay, then these are lessons that are interesting. And this has changed. And this is I think, something positive I can offer. In the past 3 months, I have been asked to speak 3-4 times a week, various audiences, right-wing and religious as well. And the fantasy that we can ignore the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, pretend that there is no occupation, say to ourselves that we can have peace with the Saudis and everything will be okay, that's gone. So although the sentiment is very much leaning to the right, to military solutions, to nationalistic thought, that's very unfortunate. But alongside that, there is an understanding that we can no longer suppress the conflict. So I think this is something that we can work with. So there is a little bit of sanity in the lunacy, the complete lunacy that is our home now.
It's the silver lining is that we can't just sort of go about life as normal, right? Keep on the status quo. Rami, I want to ask you a little bit, if you could talk a little bit about the situation for Palestinians in living in Israel. Obviously, amid all the nationalistic rhetoric and all of that, it's extremely hard to try and speak sanely about anything. And at the same time, all we're hearing really from the West Bank and such is attacks by settlers on Palestinian villages and these sorts of events escalating. What's it like to be there right now, and what's it like to try and have any of these conversations?
We live in very interesting times, I would say that. Before I answer that, I just want to make a couple of comments. I do want to come back to the quote about the Holocaust and the Nakba you read before, and I think it was a very misleading quote.
Really?
Yeah. You know what the big difference between the Holocaust and the Nakba? One is recognized, the other is not. One is recognized, the other, if you talk about it, you get silenced. The root of the so-called conflict, which we Palestinians do not call it a conflict, that is a way to minimize it. It's not a conflict, it's an occupation. What's in Gaza is not a conflict, it's a siege and a crime against humanity. I mean, the earth is round, the sky is blue, look outside, there's a genocide right now. So we can talk about complexities, we can talk about nuances right now, you know? We can have a nice academic discussion, but at that time, my people are being starved to death. So, going back to that quote, I lived in the States 5 years ago, and I remember doing these talks and doing these panels, and I always felt like, man, why do we as Palestinians need to keep reminding the world that we are equal human beings? Why do we need to keep humanizing ourselves? Why? I was on the phone the other day, 3 nights ago, with my mom. You know, people think I'm a cynical asshole, but they should meet my mom. She's a very sweet lady, I'm just kidding, she's kidding me. Shelley, are you filming this? Oh, shit. So, yeah, she will kill me. So she was in tears. She was in tears. You know, I'm in New York. I'm premiering my film there, having a lot of fun. And I'm yet to visit any college campus. I'm yet to go to Columbia. But my mom was talking to me about what was happening in New York and in other places, in the other universities and colleges in the States. And she was in tears and saying, Rami, wallah mama, a woman in her late 60s saying, I never thought I'd live to see the day where Americans will wake up. Finally, young people in the United States are starting to see us as human beings. I just came back from McGill University with a fellow Palestinian friend. It was just amazing. It was just amazing. You know what I love the most about being at McGill at the encampment over there? Almost no Arabs.
It's okay, we can say that. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm an Arab, I can say that. Okay, I'm not racist. So no, the fact that it's become mainstream in North America, hallelujah, it's become mainstream in North America to say free Palestine. You know, to recognize the fact that we Palestinians deserve freedom as well. Going back to your question. So, yeah, free Palestinians. What about freedom to Palestinian citizens of Israel? The second week of that horrifying war, the Israeli chief of police goes to the media and says, and he sends a clear warning to his own, you know, to the people he's supposed to serve, to Palestinians in Israel, saying, citizens of Israel, saying, whoever wants to show empathy or solidarity with the people of Gaza, I will send him there myself. Now, this public servant, who's very bad at his job, clearly needs a reminder what law is and what law enforcement is. So just to give you a clear, just to give you a taste what it felt like and what it still feels like to some extent in Israel, that's becoming a lawless nation. You know, they love to talk about, you know, being the only democracy in the Middle East. What democracy? What democracy? I'm a journalist. I made a career out of being outspoken and critical, right? Do you know what it feels like to be a journalist and not to be able to speak up?
What's something that you've wanted to say that you haven't been able to say?
All of it. Just all of it, man. All of it. They targeted Palestinian artists. We saw this. I mean, the same thing that's happening since 1948. It's the same formula, the same algorithm that's been happening. Targeting of artists, of thinkers, of intellectuals, of anyone who's opinionated, anyone who wants to reveal the truth. A friend of mine, an artist, was arrested because she put on her Instagram or Facebook, La ghalib illallah. There's no victor but God. I don't know how many Muslims are in here, but to Muslims, that's like a very, right? That's like something we say on a daily basis. Wallah kifak al-yawm, alhamdulillah, sabah al-khair, la ghalib illallah. She was put in jail. Dalal Abu Amni is her name. They made her life a living hell. People would gather outside her home, a bunch of Israelis, fascist Israelis, and they would demonstrate in front of her home on a daily basis. They would target her children. Her children would go to school, and they'd be followed by these fascist protesters. So, not being able to go on social media from, out of fear of maybe liking the wrong post, sharing the wrong post. I know people, public figures, Palestinian public figures. I can't say their names because their trials are still ongoing. I know Palestinian public figures that have been in house arrest since October because of social media posts. Even jokes on social media. Do you know what it feels like? You know when I hear President Biden talks about shared values? What shared values? That guy's a joke. And no, but before that, I do want to touch on, everyone knows what's happening in Gaza, but I think that not enough people talk about two other Palestinian communities that are going through hell right now. Not even remote, obviously not close to what the Gazans are experiencing at the moment, but more than 400 Palestinians in the West Bank have been killed by settlers and the Israeli army. How many people know that in here? How many people know that in here? So what? Okay, thank you. Well done. Palestinian citizens of Israel are starting to demonstrate again, are back to, you know why? Because Israel has come back to the place it knows best, to being this crazy aggressor. So we're somewhat closer to, the before times, before October 7th, but still. Nadira Shalhoub Kevorkian, a professor at Harvard University and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, was arrested because of a podcast. Was arrested because she gave an interview to a podcast. Can you fathom that? She's an academic. So right now, the situation we live in is a nightmare. You know the cliche, in Israel there's a leftist cliche that I'm sure Maya knows, this cliche, kibush mashchit, occupation corrupts. Well, occupation corrupts the soul. And right now, I think it's come to fruition, and we see, I think the collective soul of Israelis is corrupt. It's immoral. You see this, just very easy, just open TikTok, open Instagram, look at the videos of soldiers coming out of Gaza. See what they're doing, See how Israelis talk to each other, Let's put us aside. Look at what Israelis are doing to each other, And if people in here love Israel, they want to support Israel, you need to save Israel from itself. Israel is imploding at the moment, and it's dragging all of us with it.
Thank you, Rami. Maya, can you follow on that a little bit? Talk about how the conversation is inside Israel itself among the people who, it's hard to tell how many people are pro-war, how many people are not, but it does seem that most people are still, at the stage where they want to see the war's conclusion, one way or the other. And do you feel like, is it possible to have is it possible to have differing opinions on how this is supposed to pan out, on whether, like you said, that negotiations and peace are inevitable because you can't ignore the crisis anymore. What is it like? What is the sort of range of viewpoints that can be expressed?
I'd like just to comment, Rami, when I say conflict, it doesn't minimize. I also use the term conflict to talk about the Rwandan genocide in which 1 million people were murdered. So it does not minimize. I think things are evolving. Right after October 7th, it was, well, first of all, it was difficult to speak. I'm a person of words, and I found myself paralyzed. And as reality was unfolding, and I understood, everybody understood just how bad things had been, the general sentiment was that Israel has no choice but to respond in some way. And this is something that you saw also among, not all, but many Israeli leftists. I think this is changing because, surprise, war didn't solve anything. Surprise, a conflict cannot be solved using force. And the occupation cannot be ignored. And even people that maybe even 3 or 4 months ago, argued with me that there's no choice and what do you expect us to do, are speaking differently and seeing that this nothing is going to change after the war. The question is a question of leadership and whether there will be an Israeli leadership that will be brave enough to say this is not working, to do the same again and again, and to expect reality to be different is insane.
Is there anyone out there who has potential? It's like everybody's like, we're run by middle managers.
Not enough. Well, first of all,
Middle managers would be an upgrade.
not enough. Rami, you mentioned the occupation and
Did I?
the what? The what? What did you say? For me, all of my adult, actually not even my adult life, even as a child and an adolescent, I was very political and anti-occupation. And it seems that the occupation has occupied Israel. And so I completely agree with what Rami says. And the moral decay that Israel has practiced in the West Bank and in Gaza has taken over Israel. I think this is what we're seeing. And without ending the occupation, of course the Palestinians will not be free, but also Israelis will never be free. Nothing good can come of a system that is based on inequality. It just won't be. Your question regarding whether things are changing, I think they are, not fast enough. I think I'd just like to remind us that prior to October 7, Israel was torn apart by this very government who was trying, well, it actually still is trying, to bring about a judicial coup. And many Israelis hitting the streets. During all these demonstrations, the mainstream of Israelis did not want to include the discourse regarding the occupation. It was like, let's not deal with this now, it's not urgent, we have this coup we have to deal with, and if we bring up the occupation, then the right wing, like the sane right, will not join us. So it's one block on Kaplan where we demonstrated, where all the anti-occupation activists gathered. And in the beginning, it was small, and it grew during the long months of the demonstrations. I think there is a realization that there is a connection between the occupation and the judicial coup, because essentially we have a prime minister that is a criminal, a disturbed individual with no moral scruples whatsoever, who, to save himself, formed a government with the extreme right. And to them, democracy is a threat because, of course, democracy and occupation cannot coexist. They don't work together. So in order for them to continue the occupation, they had to withhold democracy. So this is actually the payment that the Israeli society is paying for occupation. And what needs to be reminded again and again and highlighted is that there will never be a democracy for Israelis with occupation. It cannot be together.
Thank you for saying that.
I'll come back to both of you in a second, but to lighten things up a little bit. Carlos,
We're no fun? Is that what you're saying?
Now I know why I've been invited.
You're the comic relief.
You guys are great at parties.
We actually are, you know this.
Carlos, I asked you a question before the panel, and I thought I had a really interesting answer that is actually, I promise you, relevant. I asked you if you were to punch any ancient philosopher in the face, who would it be, and what was your answer?
Right. So let me take the opportunity to just add one comment to defend the case for complexity. Because, I take the objection very seriously that complexity can be a kind of refuge, right? A kind of smoke screen, you hide behind it, thousands are being slaughtered and you are somehow analyzing the nuances, and that is clearly not okay. But I do really think that one can make both a strong case for recognizing complexity, and I think it is really, really necessary to see how all these pathologies that you have so vividly described, both of you, how they have emerged. I think we really have to understand, the global context, the historical context, and I think it's really, really compatible with the stance, for example, that is pro a ceasefire, that is pro-free Palestine, maybe not from the river to the sea, but certainly free Palestine in some form, and so on. So I don't think that these, saying that I don't quite know, and, taking sort of like a certain, modest, let's say, a view on, like the moral, things at stake here, I think is really compatible with, being very much pro-ceasefire, being very much pro, sort of basic justice and so on. So I don't think these stances rule each other out. So in that sense, it doesn't have to be a smoke screen or something that you hide behind if you are in favor of complexity. Now, about punching ancient philosophers. There's a lot of punching going on, but let's go back to antiquity. So I must say, I'm writing this book that Kareem mentioned. So I actually like most of the ancient philosophers, but there is one. If I have to choose one, I think it would be a Callicles. So we don't actually have any writings of Callicles. He may be a figure that Plato invented, but he's definitely, a character. And he is the kind of paradigmatic immoralist. So he openly says that right is might, that the strong should dominate, exploit, crush the weak, that it is naturally just, that it is a natural right of the strong to dominate and exploit the weak. And when I teach this material, my students are always shocked, of course, somebody who really assumes this, right? He's not hiding somehow behind anything. He's just saying, just like big fish eat small fish, just like, lions hunt antelopes, the strong have a right to dominate the weak. It's natural justice. And I feel, it's actually a position that has to be taken seriously, but if I had to punch someone, it would be him.
But so the fascinating thing about this is, like you said, it's the idea that might is right is a form of natural justice, right? Yeah. That this is the way things are and the way things should be, right? And I wonder, as you sort of contemplate these philosophical value of justice, as presented, the different forms in which it's presented, like this, or the way Plato presents it, or the way Socrates present it, or the way Aristotle presents it. Do you think there's value to talking about justice as a value in the midst of this current conflict? Because it strikes me that the world that we live in today is actually the world as described by your least favorite ancient philosopher. That it is a world where might makes right, and it is a world where nothing will happen to alter that calculus. The U.S., amidst all the campus protests and everything that's happening, continues to pass, enormous aid packages to Israel to provide weaponry. The protest votes that Arab Americans have done in places like Michigan and elsewhere haven't yet borne fruit. They haven't led to a change in policy. Even amidst like parallels between the conflict, between the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine. Many parallels. The U.S. has no problem backing Ukraine, but not the Palestinians. Yeah. So, do you feel like we are actually living in that philosopher's world?
Right. So, I don't think so. I mean, I totally agree with you that we are, observing a lot of assertions of brute power and of, kind of relentless injustice. But I think few would as openly as Kaliklis say that that's what they're doing. They still use some kind of justification. They still have some kind of explanation. They appeal to some kind of moral value. But more importantly, I think there are a lot of people who feel that that's wrong, right? So I think, our more widespread moral intuition is that actually, this kind of behavior is not right. And that's, the provocative aspect of Kaliklis' position. He says not only, are people entitled if they have the power, they have a moral obligation. That's what justice is about, right? And I think certainly everyone here feels that that's not correct. And so, I haven't lost faith entirely in our moral intuitions. Anyway, it's complicated, but maybe coming back to the question, does it make sense to talk about justice? So, there are really powerful alternative concepts of justice. Again, ancient philosophers took Kaliklis seriously and really thought about, how can they answer him, but they came up with answers. Does it make sense to talk about it given all the horrors that we're witnessing, and especially the horrors in the Middle East, right? So one feels somehow, we can talk about it, but it's somehow not being carried into, the reality, right? So the horrors continue and we're talking about justice. So I am actually skeptical about talking. I think I was already skeptical about talking last year because that's a Socratic approach, right? Socrates thinks that you can somehow convince people, change their minds, change their lives by giving them arguments, right? You come and say, that's not good, and then they will understand it's not good, and they will change their behavior, and they will no longer do the wrong thing because they understand it's wrong. And that's not how people normally function, right? You see, let's say, a Zionist and an anti-Zionist, they can, throw as many arguments at each other as they like. They will probably not change their minds at all, right? They will just be talking and talking without really listening and without changing their minds. Or take somebody who's pro-life and somebody who's pro-choice, right? They can argue. It's not going to make a difference. Plato thinks that only a revolution can save us. Right? You have to somehow do something top down. You have to, dismantle all these corrupt structures that have emerged and replace them with sound and virtuous ones, right? So he thinks really there is no hope in talking and convincing. And my own position is that one can actually achieve quite a bit through the education system. Again, it's a long-term view. We have an immediate problem now in the Middle East that needs a solution, right? And until we have taught the next generation of Palestinians and Israelis, it's going to be a very long time. But I think one should invest in this anyway.
Isn't that point of view similar to what Maya was saying? I mean, the Plato idea of like describing how to actually change things is the top-down approach, right? You need a figure like Ataturk in Turkey who just sort of like forces a direct change in the society. And yes, it's true that maybe things don't evolve in the natural way, but they happen, right? Someone like Habib Bourguiba in Tunisia who sort of forces a society to modernize. Is that like what we Is that, it's not the ideal solution, but is that the solution that can force an immediate change or an immediate addressing of the crisis?
So that is Plato's solution that he proposes, at least in some of his writings. It's a very, very violent solution. So he says, the philosopher kings have to capture the state like a kind of guerrilla troop. The state power, they have to, demolish all the structures that exist. They have to send everyone over the age of 10 into exile. So it's not the guillotine, but exile, to get rid of corruption in the minds. So you get rid of the structural corruption.
You met some 10-year-olds recently, I've got to say.
So, so Ataturk is probably, it's not a bad analogy. So I'm not in favor of that, although it might work, right? If you got rid of everyone in the Middle East over the age of 10 and started with a truly reflected, value-oriented, philosophically based education of the children that grow up, maybe, there must be, if you can somehow shelter them from the trauma,
send the rest to Rwanda.
there would be, I think, a chance. But again, I am not in favor of quite that. But bring it to the schools, bring it to the universities. Bring it in a less violent way.
Can I comment on
yes.
that? I would like to pick up on something you said. Words are used to persuade. That's one use. But there is another use, and I think this is also kind of our job. About a month ago, I met with a friend of mine I hadn't seen in a while. She's Israeli, she's Jewish, she's a lefty. And she said to me that she speaks with many people who tell her, I don't think we'll ever be able to solve this conflict. I don't have any hope. And my friend told me, I know they're wrong, but I don't know what to say. I don't know how to explain this. Can you give me words? And I found that very moving, and I take it to heart. And I think this is what people of words and ideas, this is part of our job, to help ourselves and others construct formulas, ideas. So it's not only about persuading, it's also about giving possibilities.
Ehab, I want to come to you, and before that I want to read this passage. It's from a diary by a Palestinian poet. His name is Talat Qudeh, and he had a diary about describing his life under the war in Gaza. And we published it at our magazine, so disclaimer. So bear with me with this, and I want to ask you about what he's written. So he writes the following: "It is said that the body ages while the soul remains youthful. Whether one agrees or disagrees, it's clear that our zest for life has been extinguished. The flicker of hope that once spurred us to defy death and declare our will to live despite everything has vanished. I suspect that those who survive the war in Gaza will have to abandon many familiar aspects of life: the disagreements, closeness, complex relationships, lofty aspirations, and the jumble of memories, places, and times. This isn't a critique of the Gazan spirit, but an acknowledgement that we cannot afford to lose what remains in anticipation of another unknown war. We need to foster a clearly defined, modest memory, one free of longing, the agony of loss, or persistent passion. Gaston Bachelard once said, 'We become trees when we do not exhaust the earth with our travels.' While this might hold true elsewhere, I'd rather deplete the earth with our journeys to plant trees all around than see them incinerated, their potential lost in vain. If I survive, I remind myself to document extensively what has transpired and what is occurring. I won't fault myself for portraying the truth as I've witnessed it, without adornment or pride clouding the recollection of these events. André Malraux once said, 'Every man resembles his own pain.' I am in pain now. I experience the atrophy of memory, the cloudiness of the senses, and a brain that seems to endure electric shocks daily. There is no apt description for a mind so tortured. I feel the autumn rain in the years of my life moving farther and further away. The horizon narrows, leaving me unable to foresee any future. The anguish of the empty inkwell reverberates where the mind's chambers groan, echoing Mahmoud Darwish's words, "Nothing pleases me." This sentiment resonates with me as I reflect on what has occurred, what is occurring, and what is yet to occur in our lives. Why attempt to breathe with my lungs when my country now lies breathless, plundered by the thieves of war? What is the role of writers, of the literati, of poets, to capture kind of the pain and trauma and exhaustion of these moments? And does it matter? Like he says, you know, like all you can do is just sort of sit and document what is happening as it is happening, and then hope to make sense of it later, because there's only so much that you can kind of accept and sort of internalize and describe to people who are following this war all over.
Well, I think to answer that, I have to also give my vision of what the situation is. And I think that at a very hefty price, what happened in the last 7 months. And I tell a friend the last 4 months, and they correct me, no, it's been 5 now. And I tell them 6, and they correct me, no, it's been 7. And it's going on. And I think it's very much that there is a very big price that was paid. But the gain here was that really the people of the world had started to see, many of them are seeing right now, the situation as what it is. They see Israel as an entity that believes that might is right. And if I can bomb them to smithereens, I'll just bomb them to smithereens. That's what we are seeing on the lower campus at McGill right now. But we are still not seeing any significant change in the halls of power, whether those halls of power are in the McGill administration or Columbia administration or whatever, or the prime ministers and presidents of the world. So I'm still very pessimistic, because I also link all this to the situation in the Middle East right now, in the Middle East outside of Israel. The surrounding natural allies of the Palestinian people are, without anybody blowing into smithereens, they are blown into smithereens by themselves. They are non-existent. I laugh when I hear that we are living this situation because Israel couldn't find a partner for peace. Well, Mahmoud Abbas sitting in Ramallah would sign on anything they'd give him, anything. And then they say there is no partner for peace. So the world still, I hear on Canadian newscasts now criticism of Israel, sometimes without hearing the next piece of news or the continuation of piece of news, criticism of the other side. That's a great point forward that we are seeing right now that we didn't see 6 months ago. But are we really heading to a world where
Calicles
is wrong? No, he is right. I mean, after 40-some years of pro-Palestinian activism, this is where I am right now, and that's maybe where I'm spending nights without sleep sometimes. That's why I'm writing much less right now, because now coming back to what you said, I participated in organizing the Freedom Flotilla for 6-7 years, and my friends who I worked with were trying to leave from Turkey with aid yesterday, Friday, 2 days ago. And I told them it's a no-brainer. I mean, you're not going to break any grounds because the Norwegians have already left from Cyprus, and yet Israel called Guinea-Bissau, who the ship was flagged in, and Guinea-Bissau withdrew its flag, and they couldn't leave. So we are still living in a very strange world. And who will be able to capitalize on? I'm sure it will happen. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure it will happen, because I think the same doubt was voiced in the 60s about Vietnam and the Black Rights Movement, when the universities went into uprising for those. It happened. How and when is what is keeping me up at night. Because I think that, yes, we should keep talking. Yes, when we talk right now, we are still going to, I lost friends from the Jewish community and some who are not from the Jewish community because of a couple of poems I wrote. And they said, you're glorifying terrorism. Why don't you condemn Hamas? I ask back, why aren't you condemning the IDF? And they say, we're not talking to you anymore. As simple as that. And I don't want these bridges to break because I thought that these bridges were a very important aspect of the world we're living in here, and that we could influence what is happening over there to a small extent. But I'm very sad that these bridges, some of them have broken. I'm hopeful that some of them are being rebuilt right now after 7 months and trying to open this again. I don't hesitate to write what I believe in, to say what I believe in. A friend of mine was telling me, you're one of the first people who came on radio after October 7th and managed to say it without condemning this or that, but say the situation as it is. And I'm continuing to do that. But at the same time, words are not enough anymore. Yes, there is this feel. When I wrote a poem, for example, about Vivian Silver, who is a peacenik, and who at the beginning they thought she was a hostage. I don't know how many of you know the story, but then they found out that she died on October 7th, and many people are asking what are the circumstances that she died in. Anyway, without getting into that, when I wrote a poem about that, my Arab friends, about her, my Arab friends say, can't you find an Arab woman you can write about? Why are you writing about? So nobody's happy right now. And nobody will be. And I don't care. But at the end of the day, I hope that we see a situation where there is really a way out. I was asking Rami earlier, who will capitalize on this camp protest on the McGill Lower Campus? And he said the people. And I still have, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I still have my question is, when will this awakening reach the halls of power? When will that happen? When will we see a country other than South Africa and Ireland, both of whom have been directly affected by the British occupation and all that very severely, take Israel to the International Court of Justice? Where are the Arabs? I am discouraged.
I want to go back to that point because the Arabs are non-existent in any of this. It's fascinating to see. I've often told people the story is that growing up in the Middle East, there was this young children's magazine called Majid, which I don't know if any Arabs in the audience have read it, but it was the most popular children's magazine. And every week, it was out on Wednesdays. Every week there were 2 pages, a double-page spread in the magazine that was basically excerpts from Israeli media talking about the abuses of the occupation, right? So kids my age, people who grew up in the era of the Second Intifada, who were aware of all of these things, were constantly aware that this was a cause that we identified with and that we cared about. And that's why it was always so odd to me that people thought that just because some authoritarian governments in the United Arab Emirates or in Bahrain or in Morocco signed peace deals with Israel, that all of a sudden the Arabs are just going to acquiesce to that and forget about it. But in reality, actually, what we're seeing in most of these university encampments is actually the majority of the students are not even Arabs. They're Westerners. There was a quote from a Palestinian comedian who was saying it was in response to the silence of DJ Khaled, the Palestinian American rapper who hasn't who's often talked about his Palestinian heritage, but has not talked at all about what was happening in the conflict recently. And so this comedian, his name is Anis, he's also a rapper, and he was telling the audience, we're mainstream, Habibi. White kids on TikTok are posting about it. Everybody's talking about Palestinian liberation and the decolonization of Palestine. We don't need DJ Khaled to speak up anymore. And it's because the Arabs are non-existent, whether it's the governments, they're silent, they're not really attempting any kind of actual solution or proposing an actual solution. And I think, Netanyahu thinks that they're irrelevant too. I don't think he perceives in them partners who could actually change anything on the ground. And how does it feel like to feel like the Arabs have been supplanted as really the source of the conversation around Palestine?
How does it feel like? I mean, it feels like our generation failed totally. I mean, it feels frustrating, it feels discouraging, and it feels that again, don't forget that a lot of the we here are people who consider me a deserter. You left Egypt, you left the struggle, you came to Canada, you're living a different life right now. But we are living in a world of institutions, and the Arab countries are failed institutions. Either some of them are acting as if they're multinational corporations, or some of them are acting as if they own their people. I mean, so that is a huge part of the problem. I think that I say this with a lot of sadness, but I think that some of the Palestinian Israelis that grew up in the Israeli civil society have gained a lot of the how-to that other Arab civil society has not gained at all. And it's sad to say that. It's sad. It's heartbreaking. But and that's not what the generation that grew up under Gamal Abdel Nasser thought that would be ever the case. Right. So yes, there is a lot of sadness and frustration, and that is a big part of that frustration for somebody like myself.
Thank you, Ehab. Rami, I want to come back to you. Just if you could expand a little bit on the question of pop culture, right? As the rapper Anis said, white kids on TikTok are talking about Palestinian liberation. Amid all the campus protests are happening, it really feels like it's a watershed moment. It really feels like it's something new is unfolding, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your feelings about it, your mom's feelings about it, watching something like that happen.
Stop the recording.
No, it's time for take two now. So yesterday in New York, after a screening of our film, a famous American podcaster, I will not mention her name this time, I learned my lesson. We went for drinks after the screening, and she and her boyfriend, he's Irish American, he was wearing a kufiya, like a green kufiya, because he's Irish. And she was wearing a kufiya as well, and
but not green.
No, she was wearing a red kufiya. I'm kind of colorblind, so people need to tell me.
So they tell you, and you believe.
Yeah. So anyway, and there was a discussion at the table whether another journalist was sitting with us, and she said that she respected these people who wear kufiyas, but she didn't feel comfortable doing that herself because it felt like cultural appropriation. Well, you know what it feels like to be in the U.S. or in Canada after October 7th, after the first few months of the war. I always get asked that, and the first thing I say, I can breathe. Being outside You know, walking here down the street, I spent like, 20 minutes maybe outside today, walking here down the street. I saw so many kufiyas. I saw Palestinian flags. In New York, I see Palestinian flags. In Boston, I see Palestinian flags. In San Diego, I see kufiyas everywhere. On behalf of all Palestinians, it's good. It's fine. Do cultural appropriation. We're good. We're down with that. That's fantastic. Please do. And let's circle back to the question of where the F are the Arabs. You know, it is a painful subject.
Is it because your mother is watching?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It is. Yes, I didn't say fuck. I said F. This is a very painful subject. I know, and I get that. I get that. But Palestine is not just a Palestinian issue anymore. You know, Palestine is a moral issue. Yep. You know, I don't have any kids. You know, but I mean, I imagine some of the people here have kids. You have a kid. You know, 10 years from now, your kid's gonna ask you, Baba Kareem, what did you do when the genocide of Gaza was happening?
No, he's asking me already. He's
Oh,
5,
God.
and like
Shit.
you run into you run into protests like in downtown and things like that.
Yeah.
And he knows he was really into flags, so he knows the flag of Palestine, and so he asks, like what's going on? And then I have to like explain to a 5-year-old what's going on. And
Who's growing up in Canada?
Right.
Who's growing up in Canada?
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah, and it's very difficult.
So kids in North America, kids in Latin America, kids in Asia, kids in Africa, kids in Europe are growing up learning that this is a global issue. This is an issue of morality. This is an issue of humanity. I mean, I on the plane last week I was on a plane from San Diego to New York. I took edibles, and I did what I love doing when I take edibles. I watch Fox News. They just become funnier. They just become funnier that way. And I'm in touch with people in Colombia. I'm in touch with people at Harvard. I know people at these schools, and I know what's happening.
You've been behind all of this.
Yeah, it's me and George Soros. Yeah, going back to the Jews. The Jews are behind all of this. So no, I'm like, I know the people behind this, and we just visited like Ehab. I saw you at McGill over there. I mean, these are like the cutest kids ever. I mean, these students, I love them, and I appreciate what they're doing so much. Have you seen anti-Semitic behavior over there? On that plane, from San Diego, I watched 6 hours. I watched Fox News. The framing of the protests in Colombia, everywhere, was anti-Semitic demonstrations against Israel. So, if I say no to genocide, if I say no to dead kids in Gaza, I become anti-Semitic. This is the framing, of these mainstream right-wing. I mean, they are mainstream, unfortunately. So this is what we're up against. So, going back to culture and to pop culture, seeing all these TikTokers, seeing all these young kids. I mean, I think it's becoming increasingly almost impossible, I would say now. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, it's really difficult to find, especially in big cities in North America, I'm talking about the US and Canada, to find people who are under 30 who are pro-Israeli or pro what's happening in Gaza, unless they are like, these Zionists who've been brainwashed. And believe in Jewish supremacy. So I do believe we live in historical times. I'm Ehab, I'm kind of annoying that way. Like I look at this glass and I do believe it's, it is half full. Because if I don't, I just lose my mind.
1/3.
A third. It's because of my color blindness. Yeah.
It's not water, actually.
That's why. That's why. Yeah. I do believe we are living in a historical moment, and I do believe, going back to what art plays, the role art has to play. I think people want to read Edward Said, people want to read Mahmoud Darwish, people want to read you, Ehab, at the moment, people want to read our books, people want to read our poems, and people want to watch our films and our shows. This is the time to educate people and to remind those that want us to think that the world started on October 7th, because it didn't.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
Because it didn't.
Mm-hmm. I'm very cognizant of the time. How much more time do we have, Shelley? 15, ouch.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I did have one question left. We won't take any time. It's so easy to answer, though. speaking of terminology, words like anti-Semitic, and words like Zionism, I actually took the inspiration for this from Carlos. But has the war and everything that's going on now redefined the meaning of Zionism to either of you in particular? I mean, is there a version of Zionism that you're comfortable with? Is there a version of Zionism that you are able to, or that an Israeli on the left would be willing to defend in the midst of all of this? It's a difficult question, I know, but I mean, don't take your time answering it because we're going to go for some questions to the audience. But yeah, I'd love for both of you to actually try to grapple with this for a second.
Maya, you start.
I think this is not, it's not really a possible conversation because Zionism has become, not only before October 7th, it's like a Rorschach ink blot. I don't think any of us define Zionism in the same way. I mean, if we can use the same word for Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and Netanyahu, and the same word for Israeli Jews that are leftist and have a Zionistic sentiment, it's not the same word. I would like to say that I think just like many people have a religious sentiment and that we need to respect even if we are not religious. People have nationalistic sentiments even if we don't share them. So my vision is that we need to offer a definition of Zionism that people can live with, not take from them something that they cannot give up. So a definition that I am pondering with is that Zionism is an affinity of Jews to the land, but an affinity that is in no way stronger or superior to the affinity of others to the land. So I think this is a definition I can live with, and hopefully others. But again, I think we need to. It's an interesting conversation.
I can live with that definition, but that will never happen because that will never happen because to me, I mean, am I comfortable with any form of Zionism? No, of course not, because Zionism is about Jewish supremacy. I'm good with affinity to the land that's equal to my affinity to the land, and to recognizing my affinity to that land, and to recognize it is equal. I'm fine with it. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Because kids in Israel do not grow up knowing anything about the history of this land. Mm-hmm. They think I'm a visitor. I'm the indigenous. They think I'm a visitor. And I should say thank you that I live in a so-called democratic state. So I'm not okay with any form of that ideology because it's how do you correct that? How do you mend that?
Rami, you mentioned,
Yeah.
Can I?
So, Maya and then Ehab.
Sure. No, man, yeah, sure.
You mentioned recognition. This is a huge thing. We tend to think of it as like a minor addition to the great streaks of history. No, this is the essence of everything, recognizing one another. It also has to do with October 7th and the war. I think there's a competition between both sides who gets recognition for their suffering and who minimizes the suffering of the other to in some way justify themselves, and that's silly. There's no need to make light of what happened on October 7th, and there's no need to make light of what is happening in Gaza. Nothing, not even the occupation, justifies October 7th, and nothing, not even October 7th, justifies what Israel is doing in Gaza. So this should be very, very plain. And on the subject of recognition, I'd like to say one last thing. I have a friend here in the audience today, Allah. I'm very, very thankful that you are here with me. Allah and I are sort of family. Allah's father and my father were the chief negotiators on the Oslo Accords. And the heart of the Oslo Accords was recognition. And my close friend, Ayman Odeh, parliament member, Israeli-Palestinian, said to me, not only to me, about Oslo, used the Arab term, please, friends, correct me if I get it wrong. It means the false dawn. Al-Kazib.
Al-Fajr al-Kazib.
Al-Fajr al-Kazib, thank you. And he said about Oslo that it was that moment around 4 a.m. that it's night, it's completely dark, and there's a flicker of light, and then it goes away. And only after that, the morning comes. So I would like to acknowledge Allah, your father, and my father, and to hope that it was a flicker and that we will see a new dawn.
Ehab, and then we'll go to the audience.
On the question of Zionism, I'm not going to give my own opinion. I'm going to shout out to Independent Jewish Voices Canada, who are one of the really most solid and dedicated and organized activist groups in this country. And they had a lot of internally, and I'm a member, affiliated, although I'm not Jewish, and I've been witnessing this discussion internally for a long time. Finally, a few months ago, after October 7th, they had a big discussion and they decided that they are anti-Zionist Jews, and they announced that as a position of Independent Jewish Voices. So, and I have lived in a world, now it's my own opinion, where people use different words and then they try to define them to what they're really not, to gain acceptance by others and whatever. And I'm weary of that in my own culture, and I'm as weary of that about Zionism. So I don't think that I can, and I'm referring more to Independent Jewish Voices Montreal here, that no, we should renounce Zionism at this point, and maybe we should have a long time ago.
Thank you, Ehab. We'll open the floor for a couple of questions from the audience. I think we have time for a couple of questions.
So I just wanted to begin by thanking you all. I have a close friend in Haifa, between Haifa and Jerusalem, an Israeli whose life has been devoted to peace negotiations and second-track peace negotiations, and who I'm very thrilled to be able to tell him that this kind of conversation can still happen somewhere in the world, because I guess like you, Ehab, he's seeing bridges that he's built all of his life tumbling, crashing, and I mean, he's at a very low time in his life. But interestingly, and this is the question, and maybe it's for you, Maya, I'm startled to hear him blaming Hamas for like everything. Like, it feels to me like blaming the victims somehow. Is this a point of view you're hearing a lot? Like, it's a very, like, they ruined all the chances that we had to make peace. And that's yeah. Anyway, maybe anybody else want to comment on that? It's a stunning thing for me to hear.
Well, if you're asking if Hamas is to be blamed for October 7th, the answer is
the whole
yes.
thing, though. Yeah.
Hold on. The acts committed on October 7th are horrendous, are unimaginable, are beyond what should be and can be acceptable between human beings, even those that are inside a conflict. But there is a conflict, there is a context, and I think this is what you're referring to. And the context is the conflict, and inside the conflict there is the occupation, the Israeli occupation of Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and the unequal status of Palestinians in Israel. So there is a context. Can Hamas be blamed for the whole conflict? No. Can Hamas be held responsible and should be held responsible for the atrocities that Hamas committed in Israel on civilians, murder, rape, mutilation? Yes, they should be held responsible.
So your friend is an example for the average Israeli that feels a sense of eternal victimhood, a sense of entitlement, and racism. Simple as that. Simple as that.
I don't think it's as simple as that, though.
No, it's just let me. I mean, it's not as simple as that. I mean, don't get me.
Yeah, but you made it.
They should say thank you. They should say thank you. I mean, you hear this a lot in Israel. I mean, we left Gaza in 2006. What do they want from us? Or 2005? What do they want from us? You know, most Israelis do not even know that Gaza is under siege. They do not. They do not. I kid you not. No one knows there's occupation. Talk to the average Israeli, not Maya Savir. Talk to the average Israeli. They do not know there is occupation. If you visited Israel, just talk to them.
Right, so October 7th seems like it came out of
nowhere. Out of nowhere. They do not know what Palestinians' daily lives are like. They just do not know. So to them, what happened came out of nowhere. You know, even what happened in 2014, 2012, 2008, Israel has been killing people in Gaza every other year. Children in hundreds, people in thousands. Israelis, to them, it's something that happens in a faraway land. You know? That's simple. Oh yeah, those guys, yeah.
I just want to add that so that one says the same thing here and everywhere else. There is a big difference between accepting or justifying October 7th and understanding October 7th. And that is very important to keep in mind. And for those, who know, I've been followed by this Canary Mission website that made a page for me that I am Hamasnik.
Congratulations.
Yes.
I was there too.
Yes, yeah, you're there. So probably this will be quoted there, but I'm fine with that. So if any of us wants really a better future, we have to understand, not justify, but understand where October 7th came from, because it didn't come out of nowhere. And that's where the world failed the Palestinians.
Carlos, does philosophy have an answer to this? Like, or are we doomed to just kind of?
I don't think philosophy has an answer to this, but so I completely agree that demonizing Hamas is not the way to go, that there is a context, that it's part of, deep-sitting pathologies. I am, however, against demonizing Zionism as well, and I don't think one can simply hold the Zionist project responsible. I think there is really, a broad context. The world has looked away. I mean, solutions were on the table. I was in Jerusalem in the 1990s, when there was real optimism, and I think there was a real possibility of actually finding a solution. It was derailed, but it was derailed by bad faith agents, like Yigal Amir, like Hamas, and so on. But no, this is not somehow some kind of fate. The situation we're in is not fate. This was chosen, it was imposed. I think the world has looked away, has left, the Palestinian problem to fester, has let Netanyahu and his government, which does not have the support of the majority of Israelis, do what they want. And, there has been a codependence between Hamas and Netanyahu. So there are many things, I think, that have contributed to this. And that one has to somehow, I think, look at as the context in order to understand what's going on. So this kind of demonization, in Manichaean rhetoric, I think, does just not help.